Hello and welcome to Wavescan, the international DX program from Adventist World Radio. Researched and written in Indianapolis by Dr. Adrian Peterson and produced in the studios of WRMI, shortwave, in Miami.
Usa kadakong halo gikan sa tibuok sakop sa Family Radio. Magadangat nganha kaninyo pag-usab niining adlaw.
Family Radio, WYFR, broadcasting in the Cebuano language for the Philippines. And the big news in the shortwave scene in the United States at the present time is the transfer at the end of this month of Radio Miami International, WRMI, where we're recording this program right now, from the single 50-kilowatt transmitter near Miami to the large multi-transmitter site of the shortwave station that was previously on the air at Okeechobee in Lower Central Florida for Family Radio as WYFR. Due to the significance of this remarkable development, we are interrupting the flow of regular programming in our DX program Wavescan to give due honor to the two shortwave stations, WYFR and WRMI. Next week in Wavescan, we'll present as our opening topic our tribute to the old WRMI. And for the first program in December, we plan to present our tribute to Family Radio, WYFR. All reception reports to Wavescan for the last week in November will be QSL'd with a special last week endorsement for WRMI Miami. And all reception reports to Wavescan during the first week in December will be QSL'd with a first week endorsement for the new WRMI at Okeechobee. These special endorsements will be applied to all QSL cards issued for these special editions of Wavescan, as heard on any of the stations that carry the program: WRMI Miami, KSDA Guam, AWR Network Relays, WWCR, and WINB. Where possible, direct broadcast from the old and the new WRMI would also be appreciated. Wavescan may also be heard via numerous electronic deliveries, including station websites and iPod deliveries. Listeners are encouraged to send their reception reports for these broadcasts to the Wavescan address in Indianapolis with address label and return postage, and also to the station that is carrying the programming, and also to the address for the new WRMI. The last edition of Wavescan via the old WRMI will be a special tribute to this station, and the first broadcast for the new WRMI will honor this new development. In the meantime, we move on with today's program. Today on Wavescan, the 72nd anniversary of International Encounter 1, Fire on the High Seas, Cyclone Phelan, the radio scene in India, and our Bangladesh DX report. Next Tuesday, November 19th, forms the 72nd anniversary of a mutually destructive sea battle off the coast of Australia, in which 2 war vessels were destroyed and sunk. It was on Wednesday, November 19th, 1941, that the German raider Cormoran and the Australian cruiser Sydney met in the Indian Ocean off the coast of Western Australia, and at the end of a fierce battle lasting less than an hour, both ships were totally destroyed. As a result of this disastrous engagement, 3 radio stations in Australia were ordered off the air for a temporary period of time. A mystery broadcast from the United States compounded the situation, and multitudes of conspiracy theories abounded regarding wireless communications from the 2 competing war vessels. It will take 3 episodes for us to present this long and interesting information, and so here in Wavescan today we present Part 1 under the title International Encounter 1, Fire on the High Seas. We begin with the backgrounds of the 2 competing war vessels. The Australian light cruiser HMAS Sydney was laid down at Wallsend-on-Tyne on the east coast of England, almost against the border with Scotland, on July 8, 1933. This ship was ordered by the Royal Navy under the original name, His Majesty's ship HMS Phaeton. However, even before construction was completed, the ship was bought by the Australian government for use in the Royal Australian Navy and renamed His Majesty's Australian Ship, HMAS Sydney. The new Sydney was launched on September 22nd of the next year, 1934, by Ethel Bruce, the wife of Australia's ex-Prime Minister Stanley Bruce. The ship saw service in the Mediterranean, Atlantic, Pacific, and Indian Oceans before the tragic conflict off the coast of Western Australia 7 years later. The ship Cormoran was launched at Kiel in Germany on September 15, 1938, as a merchant cargo vessel under the original name Steiermark, apparently in honor of a state in Austria. After the outbreak of war in continental Europe in September 1939, the Steiermark was converted from merchant cargo usage to a merchant raider and renamed Handelsstorkreuzer, HSK Cormoran, in honor of a Russian ship in use by Germany during World War I, and the seabird cormorant. The Cormoran, though loaded with guns and ammunition and a small airplane, was disguised as a merchant ship, and beginning in 1940 it sailed the Atlantic and Indian Oceans. Under its apparently peaceful guise, the Cormoran was successful in the destruction of 9 cargo vessels and the capture of another during its nearly 2-year-long tour before the fateful encounter with the Sydney. In November 1941, the Sydney was on a return voyage from the Dutch East Indies, Indonesia, bound south in the Indian Ocean near towards the Australian coastline, and headed for the Australian Navy base at Fremantle in Western Australia. The Cormoran was also in the Indian Ocean, heading eastwards towards Perth, with the intent of laying mines in nearby coastal waters. At 3:55 p.m. on that fateful day, Wednesday, November 14, 1941, both ships sighted each other, the German Cormoran and the Australian Sydney. In the distant haze of a beautiful spring day, the Cormoran at first mistook the Sydney as a tall sailing ship. However, when the Cormoran realized that she was facing what was at the time a hostile enemy war vessel, she turned west, facing directly into the sun, and moved away at her high speed, just 16 miles per hour. Meanwhile, the Sydney also increased her speed up to 29 miles per hour. These events began to take place 100 miles off the coast of Western Australia, straight out from Carnarvon. As the two ships began to travel parallel to each other at a distance of 3/4 of a mile, the Sydney signaled at first by lamp in Morse code and then by flags asking for identification, destination, and cargo. The Cormoran, playing for time, finally identified itself in its disguise as a Dutch freighter, the Strat Malacca. At 5 p.m., the Cormoran sent out a fake radio message in Morse code, QQQQ Strat Malacca, indicating that it was being approached by a raiding vessel. This message was heard by several different radio operators on land and on the sea. However, the Sydney maintained radio silence as previously ordered by Navy headquarters. Half an hour later, when the two ships were just 1/4 of a mile apart, the Cormoran dropped its camouflage and the Dutch flag, hoisted the German war flag, and a barrage with high explosive ammunition began between the two ships, though it is not clear to this day which ship fired first. Thus began a firefight on the high seas that lasted just 1 hour. Both ships were totally crippled. The Sydney passed astern of the Cormoran and then moved away towards Fremantle in the southeast, traveling into the darkness, though the glowing of the fires of the distant ship was seen for a total of 2.5 hours. Ultimately, as some German survivors reported, there was a brilliant flash on the distant horizon, and then just total darkness. Photographs of the underwater wreck show the bow completely blown off, separated from the main hull and upside down. At 8 p.m., Captain Theodore Detmers of the Cormoran ordered abandon ship, and at 11:30 p.m., the last of the surviving crew, including Captain Detmers, pulled off in small boats. A massive explosion, with flames 1,000 feet high, scuttled the Cormoran, which broke into 2 pieces and then disappeared beneath the waves. Both ships were now at the bottom of the ocean, 1.5 miles down. Aboard the Cormoran were nearly 400 men, and a little more than 300 survived. Some were plucked out of their lifeboats by passing ships, and others successfully made their way in their small craft to the Western Australian coastline a little north of Carnarvon. The Sydney personnel were not so fortunate. There were nearly 650 men aboard the Sydney, and not one survived, making it the largest naval tragedy in Australian history. Strategists have estimated that 70% of the personnel were killed in the massive bombardment, and it is probable that all of the small floatable escape craft were also destroyed. It is possible, though, that some men were thrown into the waters, but if so, they would have ultimately perished when no rescue was possible. 2 weeks from now, we're planning to present the next episode in this sequence, and you'll hear more of the radio story in association with all of these tragic events.
You're listening to Wavescan from Adventist World Radio. Send your comments and reception reports to Wavescan, Box 29235, Indianapolis, Indiana, 46229 in the United States. That's Wavescan, Box 29235, Indianapolis, Indiana, 46229 in the USA. Or you can email us at wavescan@awr.org. Our email once again, wavescan@awr.org.
Just before the middle of October, Cyclone Pylene struck the east coast of India with devastating results.
Kilometers of smashed trees, a landscape transformed. We've been driving along the coast of Odisha state and we've been seeing various levels of destruction, but it's really only when we come to Ganjam district over here, the epicenter, that we really get a sense of the fury of Cyclone Pylene. Houses completely demolished, trees on the ground, electrical poles on the ground, livelihoods completely destroyed. People are just...
As CNN reported from on the scene, nearly 1 million people were evacuated from coastal areas in advance of the onslaught, thus reducing the death toll to a very low figure. This was the largest single evacuation in the history of India. Cyclone Pylene, coming in slowly from the Bay of Bengal, packed wind gusts up to 180 miles an hour. The areas that sustained the most damage were the coastal localities of the state of Odisha, known previously as Orissa. One of the major responsibilities of the National Institute of Amateur Radio in Hyderabad is to provide emergency communications as needed throughout India. And in advance of Cyclone Pylene, they sent 2 personnel, Jose Jacob, VU2JOS, and Mukesh Kumar Gola, VU2MCW, to Odisha. These 2 radio operators provided on-the-spot coordination for some 200 amateur radio operators throughout Odisha to provide emergency radio communications wherever needed. Wide area newspapers in several different languages gave extensive coverage to their endeavors. Jose Jacob reported that several of the nearby major radio stations operated by All India Radio were noted on the air with extended schedules for cyclone coverage. Among these stations were Vijayawada on 738 kilohertz with 200 kilowatts, Vishakhapatnam on 927 kilohertz with 100 kilowatts, Cuttack on 972 kilohertz with 300 kilowatts, Hyderabad 738 kilohertz with 200 kilowatts, and also shortwave 4800 kilohertz with 50 kilowatts. You're listening to Wavescan from Adventist World Radio. Let's go now to Bangladesh. Here's Salahuddin Dular with his monthly DX report.
Dear listeners and radio hobbyists, welcome you in the November edition of Bangladesh DX report in Wavescan. This is Salahuddin Dular from beautiful city Rajshahi, Bangladesh. Glad to be back and thanks for listening. I also want to thank all our listeners who have sent their valuable comments and reception reports on Bangladesh DX report in Wavescan. Now let's start. The receiving log of different radio stations which I monitored. November 1st, Voice of America at 0130 to 0100 UTC in English on 6170 kHz. The SI code was 444. Radio Veritas Asia at 0100 to 0127 UTC in Urdu on 17860 kHz. The SI code was 333. November 2nd, China Radio International at 0100 to 0100 UTC in English on 6180 kHz. The SI code was 444. Radio Japan at 1300 to 1345 UTC in Bangla on 12035 kHz. The SI code was 333. November 3rd, Bangladesh Betar Domestic Service at 600 to 700 UTC on 4750 kHz. The SI code was 444. PCG Media at 1300 to 1400 UTC on 11990 kHz. The SI code was 333. November 4th, ACJB at 0115 to 0130 UTC in Bangla on 17760 kHz. The SI code was 333. Bhutan Broadcasting at 0500 to 0530 UTC in English on 6035 kHz. The SI code was 333. November 5th, BBC at 1100 to 1130 in English on 6195 kHz. The SI code was 444. IRIB in Bangla at 1420 to 1500 UTC on 7320 kHz. The SI code was 333. Antim Yatra at 1515 to 1530 UTC on 1548 kHz. The SI code was 322. November 6th, Voice of Holy Tibet in English at 1600 to 1700 UTC on 6200 kHz. The SI code was 444. Radio Thailand in English at 1900 to 1920 UTC on 9390 kHz. The SI code was 444. November 7th, Voice of Russia World Service in English at 1600 to 1630 UTC on 5955 kHz. The SI code was 444. Bangladesh DX team will issue QSL card for the correct reception report of this program. Please send your reception report to the following email address for EQSL: dxbangla@gmail.com. dxbangla@gmail.com. Okay, I will come with more DX news in the next edition. Till then, take care. Salahuddin Dollar.
Thank you very much, Salahuddin. Last week we told you on this program about the War of the Worlds program, the 75th anniversary of the War of the Worlds program by Orson Welles. Well, in the mail this week we got a copy of a special QSL card that was issued by Radio Havana, Cuba for the 75th anniversary of the War of the Worlds radio program by Orson Welles. And this is a QSL card that was issued especially by the En Contacto DX program. The DX program in Spanish from Radio Havana, Cuba. Manolo de la Rosa is the producer, and he sent us a copy of this very nice-looking color QSL card. And that was for a special program that he did, for those who sent reports on a special program he did about the Orson Welles program, War of the Worlds, on the 27th of October. By the way, if you speak Spanish and want to hear Manolo's program, it's a very good DX program every Sunday on Radio Havana, Cuba. It's on the air 3 times, and I'm going to give you the UTC times here, although they may have changed by an hour since the recent change in time here in North America. I'm not sure, but prior to the change, they were 13:35 UTC Sunday, 22:40 UTC Sunday, and 01:35 UTC Monday. That's En Contacto from Radio Havana, Cuba. weekly DX program in Spanish, produced by Manolo de la Rosa, a real friend to DXers worldwide.
This is a test broadcast of KVOH Los Angeles, the voice of hope. KVOH Los Angeles is licensed by the Federal Communications Commission in Washington, D.C., to broadcast on frequencies 17.775 megahertz in the 16-meter band and 9.975 megahertz in the 31-meter band. This is a test broadcast.
When you care enough to listen to the very best, we're the voice of hope.
KVOH, Los Angeles, California.
International shortwave radio station KVOH in Los Angeles, the Voice of Hope, signed back onto the airwaves on November 1st at 6 p.m. local time, as we've told you already in this program. The English and Spanish ID at the top of the hour that day was followed by the late Dr. George Otis explaining the vision of KVOH to carry the salvation message of Jesus Christ to listeners in Cuba, Mexico, Central and South America, as well as the United States and Canada. Dr. Otis was the founder of the Voice of Hope World Radio Network and High Adventure Ministries, establishing a station in Lebanon. Later in 1986, KVOH signed on the air, the very month that Mexico's parliament outlawed evangelical Christian broadcasting from within their borders. Strategic Communications Group is the new owner of KVOH. Strategic's president, Reverend John Taylor, and his team have brought new life to a powerful technical tool, which is shortwave radio. Reverend Taylor, the past president of High Adventure Ministries and son-in-law of Dr. Otis, commented, "I remember when we signed on KVOH the first time. I was in my mid-20s and working in the Los Angeles radio market. When George offered me a chance to reach the world with God's Word through radio, I jumped at the opportunity. International shortwave radio is the best way to reach the world with the gospel message, and the technology is about to get even better through Digital Radio Mondiale, DRM, digital shortwave broadcasting, and the introduction of new, affordable, and high-quality DRM radio receivers to the market." KVOH was off the air for the past 18 months during the change of ownership process, refurbishment of its 100,000-watt RCA transmitter, and construction of new studios. With so many shortwave stations worldwide ceasing broadcasting, it's refreshing to see KVOH boom its signal throughout the Americas, and you can hear KVOH regularly now on its frequency of 9975 kilohertz in the 31-meter band.
Norteamérica, Centroamérica, Suramérica, España y las islas del Caribe. Aquí nos unimos todos. KVOH, Los Ángeles.
Now an update on the Philippines radio scene in view of the recent hurricane or typhoon there. Galcom International in Canada reports that they received the following information from their ministry partner in the Philippines, Far East Broadcasting Company, FEBC. Carmeline Lois de Guzman wrote, "You are all aware of the devastation wrought by Super Typhoon Yolanda, international codename Haiyan, as it passed through several provinces in the central Philippines last Friday, November 8th. Typhoon Yolanda downed all means of communications in the affected areas, so it's only now that news reports are coming out." This is dated November 12th. "Our hearts keep crying out as we get new information trickling out of the affected areas. We are initiating a first response emergency radio response broadcast in one of the hardest-hit areas, Tacloban City, in Leyte Province. A 5-man team flew in on Wednesday, November 13th. In addition to first response broadcasts, they're also distributing 200 pre-tuned Galcom radios. They're also working out the purchase of another 800 crank radios, wind-up radios, for distribution so that more people can be helped by our broadcasts. Depending on the situation on the ground, we may extend our operations from 2 weeks to a month," says Carmeline Lois de Guzman of FEBC, which, of course, broadcasts on shortwave to that part of the world. And Tim Whitehead of Galcom says, "Thankfully, they have 200 radios already in the Philippines to distribute, so that people can listen for updates and where they can get supplies. And we also pass our best wishes on to our regular reporter, DX reporter in the Philippines, Henry Umahay, and hope that everything is well with him and that we'll hear from him with his regular report next month.
Oh, beautiful, far heroes proved.
And we end Wavescan today with an American patriotic song, America the Beautiful, sung by the late Ray Charles. And this is from a CD that's available at post offices in the United States these days, called Ray Charles Forever. Thanks for listening to Wavescan, the international DX program from Adventist World Radio. Researched and written in Indianapolis by Dr. Adrian Peterson. Next week on this program, tribute to the old WRMI, Indian 25th anniversary, and our Australian DX report. If you'd like a QSL card issued by Adventist World Radio or WRMI, you can send your reception reports to Wavescan, Box 29235, Indianapolis, Indiana, 46229, USA. That's Wavescan, Box 29235, Indianapolis, Indiana, 46229, USA. You can also send your comments on this program to Wavescan at awr.org. That's Wavescan at awr.org. I'm Jeff White at WRMI in Miami. Till next week, good listening, everyone.
Majesties. The fruited plain. Well, now wait a minute. I'm talking about America, sweet America. You know, God done shed His grace on thee. Yes, it is.